Dr. Klein smiled, returning to her earlier thought about why Tate seemed to hate Riley, Noah's fiancé. You keep describing Riley as the obstacle, she said softly, but I wonder if part of what frightens you is the possibility that Noah made his choice freely. Tate shook his head bitterly. Me offering Riley an alternative was a lot kinder than what my father would have offered him. I want Riley gone. Dr. Klein gave a slow nod toward the teddy bear still sitting in Tate's hands. Tate scowled, holding the bear Dr. Klein gave him during his therapy session. Then use the bear, she said quietly. Explore what you're feeling. Tate let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. He dropped the bear at his feet, angry at her words. You really want to know how I feel about Riley? Before Dr. Klein could answer, Tate suddenly grabbed the teddy bear by the head and yanked violently. The seams split apart with a tearing sound as stuffing burst onto the floor. He crushed the toy's head in his fist before throwing it across the room. That, Tate hissed, breathing heavily, is what I want to do to Riley. Silence settled over the office. Dr. Klein didn't flinch. She simply watched him carefully as his chest rose and fell with adrenaline. I wouldn't actually hurt the little asshole, Tate muttered after a moment, but I wouldn't mourn if something happened to Riley either. You have very intense feelings toward him, Dr. Klein observed evenly, but I don't think Riley himself is the center of this anger. Tate scoffed. If Riley is a complication, she continued, or a hindrance, then what exactly is he taking away from you? Tate's expression shifted almost immediately. The rage faded just enough for something rower to appear beneath it. I want to sleep the way I'm used to sleeping, he said quietly. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly. And what does that comfort look like for you? Tate stared at the torn stuffing scattered across the carpet. I like sleeping on Noah, he admitted. He keeps me warm. His voice softened involuntarily, the violence draining from him with every word. We used to just lie there sometimes, not even doing anything, just sleeping. He swallowed hard. His little body was always warm, toasty, didn't matter how bad things got in my head, when he was there I could actually sleep. Dr. Klein stayed silent, allowing him to continue. And now, she asked gently. Tate laughed once humorlessly. Now he sleeps next to Riley. The sentence sounded almost childish coming out of his mouth, painfully honest in a way the earlier threats had not been. We didn't do much sleeping toward the end anyway, Tate added after a pause, his voice lower now. Not lately. Dr. Klein leaned back slightly in her chair. That's important, she said softly, because what you're describing doesn't sound entirely sexual, it sounds regulatory. Noah became your source of emotional safety. Tate frowned immediately. Don't psychoanalyze me. You're in a psychologist's office, she replied gently. That's literally my job. He rolled his eyes, but he didn't argue further. When people experience instability, fear, emotional neglect, or trauma, Dr. Klein continued, they sometimes attach themselves very deeply to one person who makes their nervous system feel calm. The body begins associating that person with safety, warmth, sleep, regulation, and comfort. Losing them can feel physically threatening, not just emotionally painful. Tate looked away sharply, jaw tightening again. I'm not saying your feelings aren't real, she added. I think they're extremely real, but I think part of your panic about Riley comes from what Riley represents. And what's that supposed to mean? He represents permanence, Dr. Klein answered. Marriage means Noah is building a life that no longer revolves around you. Riley isn't just stealing Noah's attention in your mind. He's replacing your position emotionally, domestically, maybe even psychologically. Tate's eyes darkened. I'm not replaceable to Noah. Dr. Klein noticed how quickly he answered. No hesitation, no uncertainty, pure instinct. That certainty, she said carefully, is probably what's keeping you from grieving. Tate went quiet. You speak about Noah less like an adult romantic partner and more like someone who stabilized your existence, she continued. You describe his warmth, his presence beside you at night, the routines you shared. You rarely describe what Noah himself wanted. That's not true. Then tell me, Dr. Klein said softly, outside of what Noah gave you emotionally, what did Noah want for himself? Tate opened his mouth immediately, but no answer came out. For the first time during the session, Dr. Klein saw genuine confusion cross his face. After nearly a minute of silence, Tate muttered defensively, "He wanted me." "Did he?" she asked gently, "or did you need him too?" Tate looked furious again, but this time the anger seemed weaker, less stable. Underneath it was something far more dangerous for someone like him to confront. Fear. Not fear of Riley. Fear that Noah's love may not have belonged entirely to him anymore. Tate smiled then, a slow, satisfied smile that immediately made Dr. Klein wary. "I kissed Riley," he admitted. Dr. Klein's expression remained neutral, though she sat a little straighter. "You kissed Noah's fiancée." "I was trying to get a rise out of Noah," Tate said casually. "And I wanted to humiliate Riley. It worked too." Riley left afterward, at least for a while. "And you're proud of that?" "Of course I am," Tate replied instantly. "I got exactly what I wanted. Noah was alone afterward and I made use of it. We fucked and Noah stayed where he belonged." Dr. Klein studied him carefully. "What does made use of it mean, Tate?" He smirked, leaning back into the couch like a teenager bragging about getting away with something. "It means Noah was emotional, vulnerable, confused. Riley stormed off and Noah came to me instead." His grin widened. "That's usually how it goes." There was no triumph in Dr. Klein's face, no shock either, only concern. "You understand that manipulating emotional conflict between two people isn't love, right?" Tate rolled his eyes dramatically. "Oh, here we go." "No," she continued calmly, "I'm serious. You intentionally provoked Noah's fiancée because you knew it would destabilize their relationship. Then you took advantage of the emotional fallout because it benefited your connection with Noah." "I didn't force Noah to come to me." "That's true," Dr. Klein acknowledged, "but you engineered the situation." Tate's jaw tightened slightly. "You're describing control," she said carefully, "not intimacy." For a moment, Tate looked irritated enough to argue, but then the irritation twisted into something smug again. "When I get out of here," he said, "I'm planning on making a statement." Dr. Klein's attention sharpened immediately. "What kind of statement?" "Maybe I'll show up at Noah's wedding," Tate said casually, "cause a nice little scandal." Dr. Klein's voice stayed even. "You wouldn't do that to Noah, would you?" Tate looked at her like the answer was obvious. "Of course I would. There isn't anything I wouldn't do to make sure Noah doesn't get married to another man." The blunt honesty of the statement hung heavily in the room. Dr. Klein did not react emotionally, but internally she was becoming increasingly aware that Tate's attachment to Noah bordered on intensity. "I wouldn't want to upset my cute blonde cunt too much," Tate continued with a shrug, "but I'd find some way to stop the wedding, even if I had to change road signs so Riley couldn't find the church. I'll figure something out." Tate grinned like he was a mastermind. "I wouldn't make Noah too uncomfortable because I want to have sex with him later. If I make him too mad, he'll shut down, but if I make him just a little bit angry, the sex is better. All I have to do is annoy Riley enough and he'll leave. It worked last time." Dr. Klein stared at him for several seconds. Then her expression hardened. "Tate, you're describing Noah's emotions as though they're something you can manipulate to get the response you want." Tate's grin slowly disappeared. "You're deliberately trying to make him angry because you believe his reaction will ultimately benefit you," Dr. Klein continued. "You aren't giving him the freedom to respond naturally, you're engineering the situation." Tate looked down. Dr. Klein softened her voice but remained firm. "If you want Noah, you have to let Noah choose. You cannot manufacture Noah's anger, Riley's departure, or the boy you love's affection and then treat the result as consent." Tate was silent. For once, he didn't have a clever answer. Dr. Klein folded her hands together slowly. "What you're describing," she said carefully, "is not romantic persistence. It's sabotage." Tate shrugged again. "Call it whatever you want. Noah has the right to make choices independent of you. He's making the wrong one." "That's not your decision to make, Tate," Dr. Klein corrected. Tate's eyes narrowed. "You don't know Riley. And you don't seem willing to accept that Noah does." That hit a nerve immediately. "He doesn't love Riley the way he loves me." "Maybe," Dr. Klein said gently, "or maybe the relationship changed. Sometimes people outgrow relationships that once felt central to their lives." Tate laughed coldly. "Noah doesn't outgrow me." You speak about him like he's an extension of yourself, she observed quietly. He belongs with me. Dr. Klein caught the wording instantly. Belongs. Tate didn't answer. You rarely describe Noah as a separate person with independent wants, she continued. You describe him as someone who comforts you, regulates you, returns to you, chooses you, and sleeps beside you. But when Noah acts independently, when he chooses Riley, plans a marriage, builds a future outside your control, you respond with humiliation tactics, manipulation, fantasies of sabotage, and possessiveness. Tate's expression darkened again. You make me sound insane. I think you're emotionally terrified, Dr. Klein corrected softly. Silence. You're framing this as a love story where you're fighting for the person you belong with, she continued. But underneath that, I think you're confronting something much more frightening. And what's that? That Noah may be capable of loving you, she said carefully, without choosing you. The sentence hit him harder than anything else she had said that day. Immediately, Tate stood up from the couch and paced away from her. No, he muttered, that's bullshit. Is it? Yes. You've spent most of this session talking about ways to interrupt Noah's autonomy, bribing Riley, humiliating Riley, threatening to disrupt the wedding, manipulating emotional situations to isolate Noah. Her voice remained calm and steady. Those are the actions of someone trying to prevent abandonment, not someone secure in love. Tate turned sharply toward her. You don't understand what Noah and I are. Then help me understand. Tate opened his mouth, but instead of anger this time, frustration overtook him. He needs me, he said finally. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly, or you need him to need you. That stopped him cold again. You keep describing Noah's dependence on you, she said softly, but you rarely acknowledge your dependence on him. I'm not dependent on anyone. You just admitted you can't sleep properly without him. Tate looked away. You admitted you fantasize about sabotaging a wedding because the thought of Noah permanently choosing someone else is unbearable to you. You admitted you feel calmer, warmer, safer beside him. You admitted Riley's existence fills you with rage because Riley now occupies the emotional space you once held. Tate's breathing had slowed now, but his eyes remained restless. That's dependency, Tate. No, he whispered. It doesn't make you weak, Dr. Klein said gently, it makes you human. He shook his head harder this time, almost reflexively rejecting the idea. Human attachment becomes dangerous, she continued, when fear of losing someone becomes more important than respecting their freedom of choice. Tate stared at the floor. For the first time since the session started, he no longer looked smug or angry or superior. He looked tired. Dr. Klein noticed immediately. What scares you most? She asked quietly. Tate swallowed once before answering. That one day, he said softly, Noah's going to wake up and not love me anymore, or he finds out my secrets I've hidden for decades. Tate shifted in the folding chair, restless energy radiating off him as Dr. Klein studied him quietly. Why do you want Noah so badly that you're willing to sabotage his happiness just to regain what you want? Tate said nothing. Dr. Klein continued carefully, deliberately choosing each word. I mean, Noah is probably like any other attractive blonde man, isn't he? Replaceable. Thousands of people probably look similar to him. Tate's expression changed instantly. Maybe, Dr. Klein went on, her tone intentionally casual, Noah deserves someone simpler, someone stable. Riley sounds ordinary, but maybe ordinary is healthy. Maybe Noah wants a halfway decent, uncomplicated life. Tate's shoulders stiffened. And maybe, she added, you need to move on and find someone more suitable for you. Someone wealthy, attractive, socially compatible, someone who would openly welcome your attention. Because from the way you describe Noah, she paused slightly, watching him carefully. Noah doesn't actually sound particularly special to hold Tate Blue's attention. The reaction was immediate. Tate's entire body tensed so hard it was almost visible beneath his clothes. His jaw locked. The vein on his forehead popped, Tate's eyes sharpened with genuine fury. How dare you, he said loudly. Dr. Klein remained calm. I don't share my bed with just anyone, Tate snapped. You don't know Noah. Dr. Klein stared at Tate. Noah was a gift. I never took him for granted, Tate hissed. I could have been with anyone. I had a million people who wanted to be with me, but I only wanted Noah. Dr. Klein remained quiet, watching him carefully. You're just too stupid to know the difference, Tate added bitterly. Dr. Klein didn't react to the insult. I understand that Noah was important to you, Tate, she said calmly. I'm not questioning whether you cared about him, I'm questioning what you did with that love. Tate's expression hardened. Wanting someone deeply doesn't give you permission to manipulate their emotions, she continued. And having a million people who wanted you doesn't change the fact that Noah still had the right to decide what he wanted for himself. Tate looked away, jaw clenched. Dr. Klein waited. You can love Noah, she said. You can believe he was a gift, but loving someone also means accepting that they are a person, not something you have to control to keep. Tate went on, Noah may be a blonde and there might be 1 billion blondes in the world, but there's no blonde like Noah. He has the perfect body, his blonde hair is beautiful, his skin is flawless, his feet are the perfect size. Even the smallest details about him seem perfect to me. He's warm and it's his personality as much as his body that makes him so different. There's something about the way Noah carries himself, the way he looks at people, the way he laughs, and the way he becomes himself completely when he feels comfortable. That combination is what makes him so attractive to me. When Noah tries, he can be incredibly sexually attractive, but it's never just about his appearance. It's Noah himself, the person underneath all of it, that makes him impossible for me to compare to anyone else. There it was. Not just anger. Devotion. Adoration. Love. Reverence. I've met a lot of blondes, Tate continued, his voice rising now. There's nobody like Noah. Dr. Klein didn't interrupt him. He's compact, Tate said, almost desperately trying to explain something words couldn't fully capture. Smaller build, smaller body, and his hair. He stopped himself briefly before continuing anyway. He has the most attractive hair I've ever seen. The intensity in his voice made it obvious this was not a simple attraction. Tate spoke about Noah the way some people spoke about religion. He's not replaceable, Tate hissed, you dumb bitch. The insult barely registered to Dr. Klein compared to the emotional reaction she had just witnessed. Instead of reacting defensively, she leaned back slightly and observed him with even greater interest. You became angry the moment I minimized him, she said softly. Because you don't know what you're talking about. You reacted more strongly to me insulting Noah than you reacted while discussing your own possible trauma. Tate looked away immediately. That's significant. You were provoking me. Yes, Dr. Klein admitted openly, I was. Tate frowned slightly, caught off guard by her honesty. I wanted to see whether your attachment to Noah was superficial, possessive, or emotionally genuine. She paused. Now I know it's genuine. Tate's anger flickered uncertainly. You don't just desire him sexually, she continued. You idealize him, you've built him into something psychologically sacred. He is sacred. The answer came so quickly, it surprised even Tate himself. Dr. Klein noticed. You see him as irreplaceable, she said gently. He is. And that terrifies you. Tate scoffed, but the sound lacked confidence. When people fear abandonment intensely, Dr. Klein explained, they sometimes convince themselves there could never be another person like the one they love. The relationship becomes mythologized. The loved person stops being human and starts becoming symbolic. Noah isn't symbolic. Then tell me about his flaws. Silence. Tate stared at her. What annoys you about him? She asked. What habits frustrate you? What about him disappoints you? Again silence. Finally Tate muttered, he worries too much. That's all. He apologizes when he doesn't need to. Dr. Klein waited. And Tate's expression tightened in frustration. He stopped, I don't know. Because he had spent years mentally preserving Noah like something fragile and holy. Dr. Klein could see it clearly now. You've frozen him in your mind, she said softly, almost like preserving a memory instead of loving a fully autonomous person. That's not true. You describe his warmth, his hair, his body beside you at night, the comfort he gave you, the safety, she tilted her head slightly, but very little about who Noah actually is independent of you. Tate looked irritated again. You don't understand him. Maybe not, she agreed calmly, but I think I'm starting to understand you. That made Tate uneasy. You attach intensely, she continued. Probably very rarely, maybe only once in your life, and when you do, the attachment becomes absolute, total. You don't merely love the person, you organize your emotional survival around them. Tate crossed his arms again defensively. That kind of attachment can feel beautiful, Dr. Klein said, but it can also become dangerous if the other person grows beyond the role you assigned them. He belongs with me. There it is again, she said quietly, belongs. Tate's eyes narrowed. You don't speak about Noah like he's choosing between two men, you speak about him like he's something being taken from you. Because he is. No, Dr. Klein corrected gently, he's a person making choices you can't control. Tate looked genuinely offended by the idea. And that lack of control, she continued, seems unbearable to you. He laughed bitterly, you think I'm crazy because I love someone. No, she said softly, I think you're terrified because you love someone in a way that consumed your identity. The room fell quiet again. Dr. Klein watched Tate carefully as the anger slowly faded from his face, revealing something younger underneath it, something wounded. You know what stood out to me most, she asked. Tate didn't answer. You defended Noah's value more passionately than you defended your own. That hit him hard enough that he immediately looked away. You called him irreplaceable, she continued gently, but when I suggested you deserved someone equally attractive, wealthy, and socially compatible, you dismissed the idea instantly. Because they wouldn't be Noah. Exactly. Dr. Klein's voice softened further. I think part of you believes Noah was the only person who ever made you feel emotionally safe enough to become vulnerable. And if that's true, she paused, losing him probably feels less like heartbreak and more like psychological extinction. For the first time in the entire session, Tate said nothing at all. Dr. Klein stopped writing for the first time in several minutes. The silence that followed felt deliberate. Tate, she said carefully, you keep saying you want Noah in your life, but you still haven't really told me in what capacity. Tate stared down at his hands, rubbing his thumb slowly against his fingers. Was he your friend, she asked, a lover, a hookup, what exactly was Noah to you? For once Tate didn't answer immediately. Finally he muttered, society probably would have called him my bed warmer. Dr. Klein's expression remained neutral. He was a warm body I slept next to for 22 years until I met Chloe. The answer sounded rehearsed, almost defensive, like a phrase he had repeated internally to make something emotionally overwhelming feel smaller and more manageable. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly. Was he really just a bed warmer? Tate exhaled slowly through his nose. In the beginning, he said quietly, maybe. He looked toward the darkened window across the room instead of at her. I was cold a lot growing up, could never sleep right, I hate the dark even now. His jaw tightened slightly as though admitting that embarrassed him. Noah made things bearable after I left alone in bed in L.A. Dr. Klein listened without interrupting. He regulated me, Tate admitted reluctantly. Body temperature, sleep, and stress. When he was there, everything felt quieter. The vulnerability of the confession seemed to irritate Tate almost immediately. But I wouldn't die without him, he added quickly. I'm not codependent. Dr. Klein noticed the shift instantly, vulnerability followed by immediate self-protection. I just want him there, Tate continued stubbornly. And no fiancé, thief, or replacement is going to steal him from me. I'm a powerful man, I'll figure something out eventually, I always do. The confidence in his voice sounded thinner now than earlier in the session. Dr. Klein studied him quietly for a long moment before speaking again. You don't love Noah the way most people in movies describe love, she said softly. Tate frowned immediately. You don't love him like a temporary obsession or infatuation or lust. She folded her hands together. You love him in a way very few people ever experience. Tate scoffed, already uncomfortable. You formed a genuine sentimental attachment to him, she continued. Not just physical dependence, emotional intimacy and close partnership. You spent 22 years sleeping beside the same person. That doesn't mean anything. It means a great deal psychologically. Tate looked irritated again, but less combative now. You describe Noah like someone your nervous system memorized, Dr. Klein said gently, not just someone you desired. Tate's eyes flickered briefly. You don't talk about him like a fling, she continued. You talk about him like home. That word visibly affected him. Dr. Klein noticed immediately. You know what I find interesting? She asked softly. Every time you try to minimize Noah's importance, you accidentally reveal how deeply attached you really are. Tate looked away. You call him a bed warmer, she said, but then you describe his warmth like it saved your life. Silence. You insist you're not dependent on him, she continued, yet the idea of him marrying someone else destabilizes you emotionally to the point of obsession. Tate crossed his arms tighter. And despite claiming you could survive without him, she added carefully, you continue talking about ways to reclaim him rather than imagining a future without him. I'm not giving him up. There it is. Tate's jaw tightened. You don't just speak about Noah like someone who shared your life, Dr. Klein said quietly. You speak about him like someone intertwined with your identity. That sounds dramatic. Is it? She asked gently. Tell me something. When you imagine Noah fully gone, not temporarily upset, not angry, not distant, but truly emotionally gone from your life forever, what do you feel? Tate answered immediately. Angry. Only angry. He hesitated. Dr. Klein waited patiently. Finally Tate muttered, empty. The word came out so quietly that it barely sounded intentional. Dr. Klein softened slightly. That's the honest answer. Tate looked irritated at himself for saying it aloud. You know, Dr. Klein continued carefully, most people who are merely possessive don't describe emptiness when imagining separation. They describe wounded pride, rejection, embarrassment. Tate stayed silent. But you, she said softly, describe emotional absence like a physical void. The room felt smaller suddenly. You built your routines around him, Dr. Klein continued. You sleep on top of him, your emotional regulation is formed around him, your sense of safety includes Noah. Whether you intended to or not, Noah became integrated into your psychological structure. Tate laughed once under his breath. That sounds insane. It sounds deeply human. He shook his head immediately. No, he muttered, people like me don't get attached like that. Why not? Because attachment makes rich men weak. Dr. Klein leaned back slightly. Yet despite all your money, status, power, relationships, and control, she said softly, the thing affecting you most profoundly is still one blonde man sleeping beside someone else. Tate looked away sharply. That must be difficult for someone like you. He didn't answer. You know what I think, she asked after a moment. What? I think you've spent years trying to redefine Noah into something smaller because admitting how much he matters terrifies you. That's bullshit. You call him a bed warmer instead of admitting he was emotionally important. She tilted her head slightly. You reduce 22 years of intimacy to body heat because sleeping by a blonde for convenience sounds practical, safe, manageable. Tate's breathing slowed. But practical explanations don't usually produce this level of grief, she continued gently. This level of possessiveness, this level of panic. I'm not panicking. You threatened to sabotage a wedding. Tate went quiet again. You know what I hear every time you talk about Noah? Dr. Klein asked softly. He didn't answer. I hear someone trying desperately to convince himself that love is transactional because the alternative is too vulnerable. That made Tate visibly uncomfortable. Body warmth, shared beds, comfort, routine, those things feel safer to discuss than love. She paused, because if this is love, then you're no longer in control of it. Tate swallowed once. And that's frightening for you because love can't be managed like money or power or influence. Her voice became even gentler. Love leaves you vulnerable to abandonment. The word abandonment seemed to hit him instantly. I'm not afraid of abandonment. No, Dr. Klein asked softly. Then why does Noah choosing Riley feel like theft instead of choice? Tate's mouth opened slightly, but no answer came. You speak as though Riley stole something belonging to you, she continued. But the intensity of your anger suggests something deeper than entitlement. She watched him carefully before finishing the thought. It sounds like grief. Tate laughed bitterly. He's not dead. No, Dr. Klein agreed quietly, which may actually be harder for you. That made Tate finally look at her again. Because he still exists, she said softly. He's still alive, still reachable, still speaking, still loving, just not in the way you want anymore. The room fell silent again. Then Dr. Klein said something that completely disarmed him. Even if one day you woke up no longer romantically in love with Noah, she said carefully, I still think you would love him and stay next to him in the same way you did for 22 years before your first night together as lovers. Tate laughed immediately like the idea itself was absurd. But Dr. Klein continued anyway. Not movie love, not obsession, not jealousy, not possession, she shook her head slightly. I mean enduring attachment. Tate's smile faded little by little as she spoke. Some people become emotionally permanent to us, she said quietly, not because we own them, not because we're with them forever, but because they shaped the architecture of who we are. Tate stared at the floor. I think Noah became part of your emotional foundation very young, she continued. And people connected to our foundational development rarely disappear completely, even after relationships change. Tate's voice was quieter now. So what, I'm just supposed to let him marry somebody else? Dr. Klein paused before answering. I think, she said gently, the real question is whether you love Noah enough to allow him to become a full person instead of a role in your life. Tate looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means, she said softly, that real love eventually asks us a painful question. Silence. Do you love the person, she asked, or do you love what they provided for you? Dr. Klein let the silence settle for a few moments before deliberately steering the conversation elsewhere. Why don't we change the subject for a minute, she said gently. Tell me about your sex life before Noah. Were you involved with anyone else? My wife Chloe, Tate answered. And how was that relationship physically? Tate gave a dry laugh under his breath. I don't know, how would you feel if you had to sleep with somebody you weren't actually attracted to in that way? Dr. Klein nodded slowly. I imagine I'd feel very empty. Exactly, Tate said immediately, almost relieved she understood. It felt performative, mechanical, like I was playing a role everybody expected from me. Dr. Klein made a small note in her pad. And with Noah. The change in Tate's demeanor was immediate. His tension softened into something far more vulnerable and involuntary. Tate looked down at the floor as though embarrassed by the answer. Tate shifted in his folded chair, glancing at the parts of the bear he tore in half, then cleared his throat softly. I like how Noah's body fits next to mine, he admitted quietly. He's smaller, compact. Dr. Klein listened carefully. But he's not weak, Tate clarified quickly, and he's not feminine either. People assume that because he's blonde and smaller than me, but they don't know him. His voice softened further. He's just different. Different how? Tate struggled for the right words. When I'm around him, he said slowly, my body reacts before my brain does. I don't even think about it, it just happens. The honesty in his voice was almost startling now. He's the most attractive person I've ever met, Tate admitted. Not just physically, everything about him pulls me in. Noah is kind, sweet, friendly, honest, and doesn't take advantage of my trust. Dr. Klein noticed that Tate's earlier arrogance had almost completely disappeared whenever he spoke sincerely about Noah. You describe attraction to Noah almost like an addiction, she observed carefully. Tate laughed quietly without humor. Yeah, he admitted. He's like heroin I can't say no to. After I left him for Chloe, Tate explained, a small frown of regret tinting his face, I lived a year without having access to Noah and survived. I don't need him, but I want him. Dr. Klein's expression remained calm, though internally she noted the intensity of the comparison immediately. And how does Noah respond to that intensity? Tate smirked faintly for the first time in several minutes. He gets overwhelmed, he admitted. I always want more attention from him than he wants to give. There was something strangely boyish about the way he said it. He used to shove me away when I got clingy, Tate continued. Then he'd laugh and disappear for a few hours because he knew I'd follow him around afterward. The memory softened him visibly. Dr. Klein noticed that whenever Tate described moments of mutual affection or intimacy with Noah, his voice became calmer, almost peaceful. But the moment separation entered the conversation, the possessiveness returned. "You know what stands out to me?" she asked softly. "What?" "You don't actually describe Noah in overtly sexual terms very often." Tate frowned slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You focus more on warmth, contact, and presence. Wanting him near matters most to you." Tate looked thoughtful for the first time. "I guess. Sex matters to you, but it's not your core attachment." Tate leaned back slightly, considering that. "I think physical intimacy became intertwined with emotional safety very early for you," she continued carefully. "Being close to Noah reassured you psychologically. He calms me down." "That's exactly my point." The room grew quiet again. "You know," Dr. Klein said after a moment, "people often misunderstand attachment like yours. They assume it's purely lust because the emotional dependency underneath is harder to recognize." Tate looked at her suspiciously. "But the way you describe Noah," she continued, "doesn't sound like someone objectifying another person. It sounds like someone emotionally anchored to them." Tate looked down again. "When you say his body fits perfectly beside yours," she added gently, "that doesn't sound purely sexual to me, it sounds comforting." Tate's voice lowered. "It is." The admission hung quietly between them. "I sleep better on top of him than I ever have with anybody else. Even now." Tate hesitated. "Yeah." Dr. Klein made another small note. "And what happens emotionally when you can't have that closeness anymore?" Immediately, the tension returned to his shoulders. "I get angry. At Noah. At everything." She nodded slowly. "That's important." Tate looked annoyed again. "Why does every answer I give sound important to you people?" "Because emotions usually make sense once you understand what purpose they're serving," Dr. Klein replied gently. "Anger is often protective." "Protective of what?" "Pain." That answer quieted him again. "You seem far more comfortable expressing possessiveness than grief," she continued softly, "far more comfortable expressing desire than vulnerability." Tate stared at the floor. "But underneath the sexual intensity," she said, "I think there's a much simpler fear." He looked up slightly. "You're terrified of emotional distance." The sentence landed hard enough that Tate immediately looked away again. "You don't just want Noah physically," Dr. Klein continued carefully. "You want reassurance that the emotional bond still exists." Tate didn't answer. "And when you don't feel reassured," she added, "your attachment turns desperate." Silence. Dr. Klein studied him for another moment before speaking again. "You know something else I've noticed?" "What?" "When you describe Chloe, you sound detached." She paused. "When you describe Noah, you sound alive." Tate swallowed once. "That difference matters." Dr. Klein's expression did not harden, but her attention sharpened immediately at the wording Tate chose. Out of all the questions she had asked him, this one seemed to reach the deepest part of him. "What is the one thing," she asked softly, "that makes you feel most loved by Noah?" It could be an activity, a memory, a behavior, a routine. What makes you feel love most intensely? Tate didn't hesitate. "Sex," he whispered. The honesty in his voice startled even him. Dr. Klein stayed calm and let him continue. "I know it's cliché," Tate muttered bitterly. "Everybody says men only express themselves physically, but I can't help it." He rubbed his hands together anxiously. "The most fulfilled I ever feel is when I'm consensually physically close to him." "Because of the physical pleasure?" she asked gently. Tate shook his head immediately. "No, that's not the most important part." He struggled for the words. "It's when I can make him feel wanted, safe, when he lets me close enough to see every reaction, every expression, that's when I feel connected to him." Dr. Klein noticed the subtle shift immediately. Tate had started by talking about sex, but his emotional focus remained intimacy, access, and emotional reassurance. "If I can't make him happy," Tate admitted quietly, "I stop feeling loved." That sentence lingered heavily in the room. Dr. Klein spoke carefully now. "So, physical intimacy became proof of emotional acceptance for you." Tate looked irritated by how quickly she understood him. When Noah wanted you physically, she continued, you interpreted that as safety, confirmation, reassurance that the bond still existed. Yes. And when he pulled away, Tate's jaw tightened. I panicked. The honesty of the answer surprised both of them. Dr. Klein nodded slowly. That makes sense. Tate frowned slightly. You're not going to tell me I'm sick for that. No, she answered calmly. Wanting intimacy isn't a sickness, but I do think your relationship with physical affection became emotionally overloaded. Tate leaned back silently. You don't describe sex as conquest, she continued. You describe it almost like emotional translation, like it's the only language vulnerable enough to communicate what you actually feel. That made him go still. Does that sound accurate? After 20 seconds, Tate nodded once. I don't know how to explain feelings normally, he admitted. Talking about emotions makes me feel stupid, weak, he exhaled slowly. But when I'm close to him physically, I don't have to explain anything, he understands. Dr. Klein made another small note. That's very important, Tate. He rolled his eyes slightly. Everything's important with you. She smiled faintly. Occupational hazard. For the first time in a while, Tate almost smiled back. But Dr. Klein's expression became serious again. I do need to point out something concerning, though. Tate's expression hardened instantly. You described intimacy as forcing him to acknowledge your feelings. He looked away immediately. That wording matters. I didn't mean I'd hurt him. I know, she said gently, but love cannot survive if one person's emotional needs overpower the other person's autonomy. Tate crossed his arms defensively again. I think what you're describing is desperation, she continued carefully, not control. Silence. You became so emotionally dependent on physical closeness with Noah that distance started feeling unbearable, she paused. And when people become terrified of emotional distance, they sometimes confuse intensity with intimacy. Tate frowned slightly. What's the difference? Intensity is overwhelming, Dr. Klein explained softly. Intimacy is mutual. That sentence made him visibly uncomfortable. You seem to experience love most powerfully through emotional surrender, she continued. You want complete closeness, complete reassurance, complete access to the person you love. Yes. But another person can't exist solely to regulate your fear. Tate stared at the floor again. I show my love by giving my friends money or when I'm physically intimate with Noah during sex. I feel loved and accepted. The most intense form of love I feel is when I am allowed to have consensual sex with Noah. It's not about me having pleasure. It's about him allowing me to express the depth of my feelings, and when he pushes me away or withholds his body from me, I don't feel loved. I know that I'm not entitled to his body, and individuals like Noah can't withhold sex because intimacy should be willingly given. But if you've ever been intimate with Noah, you would understand why him not sharing his body makes me doubt his feelings. Dr. Klein smiled softly, setting her stylus down on the edge of the paper tablet. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of rain against the windows. So, she said carefully, folding one leg over the other, tell me more about the dynamic between you and Noah. Emotionally, physically, how do the two of you function together? Tate kept staring at the carpet. His shoulders were tense, jaw tight. I'm the top, he said after a long pause. Noah's the bottom, we don't switch or anything. And how does that arrangement usually happen? Dr. Klein asked. Tate shrugged once. I initiate everything. Everything. Pretty much, he rubbed his palms together anxiously. Noah doesn't really start things, he never has. Dr. Klein nodded neutrally, giving him space to continue. He's complicated, Tate muttered. He gets scared, not of me just on his own, of what he feels, of needing someone. And what makes you believe that? She asked gently. Because I know him, Tate's voice sharpened with certainty. Everybody else thinks Noah's quiet because he's calm or independent or whatever, but he's not. He's terrified all the time. He pulls away from things he wants. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly, including intimacy. Yeah, Tate exhaled heavily, especially intimacy. And when he pulls away. Tate hesitated. I usually try to confront his fears. The therapist's expression remained composed but attentive now. What does confront his fears mean to you, Tate? I mean, Tate frowned, struggling to explain himself correctly. I won't force him, I'm not saying I would, I just mean Noah's the kind of person who needs to feel something before he admits he wants it. Sometimes he says no because he's overwhelmed or scared or ashamed, but once he relaxes, once he starts kissing me back. His voice softened unconsciously. Then he wants me there. Dr. Klein was quiet for a moment. So, from your perspective, his initial resistance isn't rejection, it's anxiety. Yes, Tate looked up immediately, relieved someone had phrased it better than he could. Exactly, that's exactly what I mean. And how do you tell the difference, she asked calmly, between fear that eventually settles and a boundary that should remain respected? That question visibly hit him. Tate looked away again. I know Noah. I don't doubt that you know him deeply, Dr. Klein replied, but I'm asking how you interpret consent in those moments. Tate swallowed hard. If he didn't want me touching him, I'd stop. How would you know? He stops responding, Tate answered immediately, or he freezes up completely. Sometimes he cries when he's overwhelmed, but not because he's hurt, it's emotional. Dr. Klein remained composed, and when that happens, I comfort him. And stop. Yes. The silence after that word felt heavier than anything else in the room. Tate leaned forward suddenly, frustrated with himself. I stay in tune with his body language. I'm here to understand why you do what you do, Tate, Dr. Klein said evenly. Am I hurting him? I think, she replied carefully, that you're describing a relationship where emotional dependency, fear, desire, and reassurance are all tangled together. That can make consent feel emotionally confusing for both people involved. Tate's face tightened. I would never knowingly violate him. I believe you, she said. People who intentionally harm others rarely spend this much time trying to justify to themselves that they're safe. Tate looked exhausted by that sentence. Dr. Klein continued gently, but good intentions don't automatically create healthy dynamics. Sometimes people convince themselves they understand another person's silence better than the other person does. Tate rubbed at his eyes. Noah never asks for anything, he never says what he wants. Someone has to take control or nothing happens. And you feel responsible for carrying the emotional weight of the relationship. Yes, at least until he can overcome his fears. Does Noah ever make you feel wanted? The question stunned him into silence. After several seconds he laughed quietly under his breath, though there was no humor in it, not directly. That sounds painful. Tate's eyes remained fixed downward. You don't understand, Noah loves me in small ways, quiet ways. He falls asleep next to me even when he's angry. He memorizes things about me nobody else notices. He panics when he thinks I'm leaving. Tate shook his head helplessly. He can't say things out loud. Dr. Klein watched him carefully, and physical intimacy becomes the place where you search for reassurance. Tate nodded slowly. When Noah responds physically, she continued, you interpret that as proof that he loves you. Yes. And when he resists? Tate's voice dropped almost to a whisper, it feels like abandonment. That answer changed the atmosphere in the room. Dr. Klein leaned back slightly, her tone softening further. That's important, Tate. He looked confused. You're not only describing sex, she explained. You're describing fear, fear of rejection, fear that if Noah pulls away emotionally, you disappear. Tate's throat tightened. I just want him close to me. I know. Another long silence passed. Finally, Dr. Klein spoke again. Can I offer you an observation? Tate nodded faintly. You talk about Noah as though he's always frightened and you're always responsible for managing that fear. But in this room, the person who sounds most afraid is you. Tate blinked hard at that. You seem terrified, she continued gently, that if you stop pursuing him, stop initiating, stop persuading, he may not choose you on his own. For the first time since entering the office, Tate looked genuinely shaken. I don't know if he would, he admitted quietly. Dr. Klein let the honesty sit between them without interruption. Then she asked, and if Noah only comes toward you when there's no pressure at all, would you be willing to find out what that looks like? I think so, Tate said quietly. He leaned back into the folded chair, though there was no comfort in the position. The metal frame creaked softly whenever he shifted his weight. His knee bounced restlessly, fingers twisting together as though he were trying to physically untangle his own thoughts before speaking to them aloud. Noah's complicated. Dr. Klein remained still, giving him room to continue. He's convinced himself he's not in love with me, Tate said, but every time I kiss him, he kisses me back just as hard as I kiss him. His expression softened despite himself, memory overtaking frustration for a moment. He tries to run sometimes, emotionally I mean, he pulls away, says he wants distance, says we're unhealthy or impossible or whatever he's telling himself that week. But then I hold him, I push him to stop overthinking everything, and once he lets himself feel what he actually feels, Tate shook his head faintly. He's passionate, more passionate than anyone I've ever met. Dr. Klein watched him carefully. You describe Noah almost like someone at war with himself, she observed. He is, Tate answered immediately. That's exactly what he is. And you see yourself as the person trying to free him from that conflict. Yes. Do you think Noah would describe the situation the same way? That question caused a brief pause. Tate frowned, probably not. What do you think he would say? Tate exhaled slowly, he'd probably say I overwhelm him. And do you? Another silence. Sometimes, Tate admitted, but not because I want to hurt him, he searched for the words helplessly. I can see him denying himself happiness in real time. It's hard to stand there and watch someone you love walk toward a life that's safe instead of real. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly. You believe Noah is choosing safety over authenticity? Yes. And Riley represents that safety. Tate nodded immediately. I think Riley's probably a good person, he said. Seriously, I don't hate him. He might treat Noah well, he might give him stability, maybe they'll even have a decent life together. But there's a difference between being satisfied and feeling really alive. Tate's voice grew more emotional as he continued. Noah spent his entire life surviving things, pretending, shrinking himself down into something manageable so nobody leaves him, judges him, or hurts him, and now he's trying to build a relationship around feeling safe instead of feeling deeply. Dr. Klein folded her hands together thoughtfully. And you think you represent depth? Tate laughed quietly under his breath. I think I represent risk. That's an interesting distinction. He doesn't look at Riley the way he looks at me, Tate said with complete certainty. With Riley he looks calm, with me. His voice lowered. With me he looks terrified. Dr. Klein's gaze sharpened slightly. And you interpret that terror as love. Tate hesitated. Sometimes. Dr. Klein folded the paper tablet closed and set it carefully on the small table beside her chair. The muted click of it snapping shut seemed to signal the end of the session more than her words did. We're almost out of time for today, Tate. Tate sat quietly in the folded chair across from her, elbows resting on his knees now, hands clasped tightly together. The nervous energy that had followed him into the office hours earlier had dulled into exhaustion. But he still looked alert the moment Noah's name lingered in the room. Dr. Klein studied him for a moment before continuing. You've made several interesting points today. Tate gave a faint, humorless laugh. That usually means a therapist is about to tell me I'm delusional in a polite way. A small smile touched the corner of her mouth. Not necessarily. She leaned back slightly in her chair. I think what you're describing is more emotionally complicated than simple obsession or manipulation. Tate's eyes flickered upward toward her immediately. You don't overwhelm Noah in a malicious way, she continued carefully. From your perspective, you're trying to help him confront emotions he may not be capable of facing on his own. Tate's shoulders loosened almost imperceptibly. Yes, he said quietly, exactly. You believe Noah suppresses his feelings because he associates vulnerability with pain. He does. And based on what you've described, Dr. Klein said, that belief wouldn't come from nowhere. Tate swallowed hard. You've admitted that in the past you hurt him emotionally, she continued. You left him, chose a relationship that aligned more closely with what your family expected from you. Even if your intentions were conflicted, Noah likely experienced that as abandonment. Tate lowered his eyes again. I know. Dr. Klein's voice softened. That kind of wound changes people. The room became quiet again. Rain tapped lightly against the windows of the facility. Somewhere beyond the hallway, a distant intercom crackled briefly before fading back into silence. Tate stared at his intertwined fingers. I thought I was protecting him back then, he admitted quietly, or maybe protecting myself. Those things are often connected. I kept telling myself if I could just become normal long enough, he laughed faintly, whatever normal even means. Dr. Klein remained attentive. I thought if I built the life everybody wanted from me, maybe eventually I'd stop wanting him. Tate's expression tightened. But it didn't work, it just made me resent myself and hurt Noah in the process. And now, she asked gently. Now I think he's doing the same thing I did. That answer hung heavily between them. Dr. Klein folded her hands together loosely in her lap. It's not unusual, she said carefully, for someone with Noah's emotional history to choose caution over desire, especially after being hurt. Tate nodded once. That's what scares me. Tell me. He's convincing himself stability is love. Tate looked up now, intensity returning to his voice despite the exhaustion underneath it. He thinks because Riley is safe, because Riley is kind and predictable and won't break his heart, that means he should stay there. And you disagree. I think safety matters, Tate said immediately. I'm not saying it doesn't. I know what it's like to grow up feeling emotionally unsafe all the time. I know what it's like to feel judged every second of your life. Tate's voice lowered in volume. There's a difference between feeling safe and hiding in relationships. Dr. Klein nodded slightly but did not interrupt. I think Noah's tired, Tate continued. Tired enough that he'd rather choose the path that hurts the least instead of the one he actually wants. And you believe the thing he actually wants is you? Tate answered without hesitation, yes. Dr. Klein studied him carefully, even now. Yes. What gives you that certainty? Tate leaned back slightly in the folded chair, staring toward the ceiling as if replaying years of memories only he could see. The way he looks at me when he forgets to guard himself. Dr. Klein stayed quiet. He'll spend weeks pretending he's over me, Tate said softly, acting detached, telling himself we're toxic or impossible or bad for each other. Then when I touch him, he melts like he's been starving. The vulnerability in his voice made the statement sound less triumphant than tragic. He still loves me, Tate whispered. I know he does. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly. Love can exist without compatibility. Tate gave a faint, frustrated smile. Therapists really love saying things like that. Because they're often true. Tate rubbed at his face tiredly. You know what the worst part is? What? I understand why he's afraid of me. That answer shifted the atmosphere again. Dr. Klein's expression softened noticeably. Tell me more. Tate stared ahead for several long seconds before answering. When Noah loves someone, he said quietly, he loves completely. It consumes him, and I think part of him knows if he fully gave into what exists between us, he'd lose the version of himself he built to survive. You believe loving you threatens his stability? Yes. And how does that make you feel? Tate laughed bitterly under his breath, like a natural disaster. Dr. Klein did not smile at the joke. You don't seem proud of that. I'm not. Tate's eyes looked suddenly tired in a way that made him seem younger. I never wanted to become somebody who made him afraid. Do you think Noah is afraid of you, she asked carefully, or afraid of what loving you would require from him emotionally? Tate thought about that. Both. The honesty of the answer lingered heavily. Dr. Klein nodded slowly. That distinction matters. Why? Because one can potentially be repaired through trust and accountability, she explained gently. The other may simply reflect incompatibility in emotional needs. Tate frowned slightly. You and Noah may genuinely love each other deeply, she continued, but if the relationship repeatedly destabilizes him emotionally, eventually he may choose peace over intensity. That sounds miserable. To you. Tate looked at her. But to someone exhausted by emotional unpredictability, she said softly, peace can feel extraordinary. He looked away again after that. Several moments passed before Dr. Klein spoke once more. Earlier you said something important, she said. You said there's a difference between feeling safe and settling for safety. Tate nodded slowly. I think that's true, she continued. Some people do settle because they're afraid of vulnerability, rejection, uncertainty, or pain. Tate's attention sharpened immediately. But, Dr. Klein added carefully, sometimes people also choose stability because they've finally realized chaos is not the same thing as love. The sentence visibly affected him. I know, he admitted quietly. I know our relationship isn't healthy sometimes. I've spent a few months in therapy, which helps me avoid falling into old patterns where I control and demand from Noah while instead choosing a different route towards trust and respecting boundaries. That awareness matters. But unhealthy doesn't mean unreal, Tate's voice roughened slightly. I'm so tired of people acting as if something is difficult or messy it can't possibly be meaningful. Dr. Klein nodded once. Messy relationships can absolutely be meaningful. Then why does everybody act like Riley automatically wins because he's calm? Nobody wins, Tate. It feels like he does. Because you associate emotional restraint with emotional emptiness. Tate sat silently. Dr. Klein continued carefully, you experience love as something consuming, transformative, dangerous even. That's because it is dangerous. For you perhaps. Tate let out a faint exhale through his nose. You really think people can just quietly love each other forever without all this? He gestured vaguely between them as though this represented every overwhelming feeling inside him. Yes, Dr. Klein answered simply. That sounds fake. It may only sound unfamiliar. That answer silenced him for a while. The therapist glanced briefly toward the clock before looking back at him. There's something else I think you need to consider. Tate straightened slightly. You may have to accept that you made Noah wait too long for any chance at a long-term romantic relationship. The words hit immediately. Tate's jaw tightened though he said nothing. Sometimes, Dr. Klein continued gently, people reach a point where loving someone becomes too painful to sustain. Tate looked down at the floor. And when another person enters their life, she said, especially someone who offers consistency, kindness, and emotional safety, they begin building new associations, new routines, new trust. Tate swallowed hard. There can be a point of no return, she finished softly. For several seconds he didn't respond at all. Then finally, I think he still waits for me. Dr. Klein's expression remained compassionate, possibly. He does, Tate insisted quietly now, I can feel it. And if he does? Tate looked at her helplessly, then I have to try. Try what? To tell him the truth before it's too late. Dr. Klein considered that carefully. And what is the truth? Tate's eyes glistened faintly, though his voice stayed steady. That I loved him before I knew how to love anybody correctly. The room fell silent again. That, Dr. Klein said softly after a moment, is probably the most emotionally honest thing you've said all day. Tate laughed weakly under his breath. Yeah, well, took me long enough. I'm so fucked up, doctor, but I don't want to be fucked up with Noah. Dr. Klein reached for her tablet again but didn't open it yet. I think when you leave this facility, she said carefully, you should speak to Noah, calmly, honestly, without trying to persuade or overwhelm him. Tate looked uncertain at that wording. You need to allow him space to tell you what he actually wants, she continued. Not what you fear he wants, not what you hope he wants, what he truly wants. And if it's Riley, Tate asked quietly. Dr. Klein's expression softened with genuine sympathy then. Then part of loving him may involve accepting that his version of happiness does not look like yours. Tate stared downward again, visibly struggling with that possibility. After a long silence he finally asked, almost reluctantly. And if he's settling? Dr. Klein paused before answering. Then that's something Noah himself has to discover. Tate nodded faintly, though it clearly wasn't the answer he wanted. You cannot force another person into emotional clarity, she added gently, even when you believe you understand them deeply. He gave a tired smile at that. You really like reminding me I can't control people. You seem like someone who learned very young that control feels safer than uncertainty. That observation landed quietly but deeply. Tate leaned back in the folded chair again, staring at the ceiling for a long moment before speaking. I just don't want him to wake up 10 years from now beside somebody safe and realize he traded away the love of his life because he was scared. Dr. Klein looked at him thoughtfully. And I don't want you waking up 10 years from now believing love only counts if it hurts. I think my choice to keep the truth from Noah is what hurt him, not the love we felt for each other. Neither of them spoke after that. The session was over. But Tate remained sitting there for several seconds longer, staring ahead like someone standing emotionally at the edge of something irreversible. Dr. Klein smiled faintly as she picked the paper tablet back up, though she still didn't open it. The session had technically ended several minutes ago, yet neither of them seemed fully ready to leave the conversation behind. Tate, she said softly, before we see each other again tomorrow afternoon, I want you to spend some time sitting with a difficult possibility. Tate remained in the folded chair, one hand resting against the back of his neck now. He looked emotionally wrung out but attentive. What possibility? He asked quietly. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly. You've spent most of today describing Noah as someone who hides from the truth of his own feelings. Tate nodded once. You believe he suppresses what he feels for you because loving you openly has never felt emotionally safe. Yes. You believe he's performing a version of stability instead of confronting what he actually wants. Another nod, right. Dr. Klein's expression softened, though her voice became more deliberate. But what if you're doing the same thing? The question landed instantly. Tate frowned slightly. I'm not hiding my feelings for him. I don't think you're hiding your feelings, she clarified gently. I think you may be hiding yourself. That silenced him. Dr. Klein leaned back in her chair. You speak about Noah as though he's emotionally guarded, she continued, but you strike me as someone deeply compartmentalized. Tate looked away immediately after that word. She noticed. There it is, she said softly. Tate gave a faint, uneasy laugh. You therapists really notice everything, huh? It's my job. Room grew quiet again. Finally Tate spoke. You think I'm lying to him. I think omission can become its own form of dishonesty. Tate's jaw tightened faintly. Dr. Klein continued carefully. A lot of people raised in environments built around image, wealth, reputation, or power learn very young how to divide themselves into acceptable pieces. Tate stared at the floor. One version for family, she said. One version for the public, one version for romantic relationships, one version they barely allow themselves to acknowledge. His silence felt louder now. A lot of wealthy families, Dr. Klein continued gently, operate emotionally through secrecy. Appearances become survival, vulnerability becomes dangerous. Tate let out a slow breath through his nose. You speak about Noah hiding, she said softly, but I can feel you holding things back too. Tate rubbed a hand across his mouth. Everybody holds things back. Yes, Dr. Klein replied calmly, but not everybody builds entire identities around it. That one visibly hit harder. Tate leaned forward slightly in the folded chair, elbows resting on his knees again. You don't understand, he muttered. Then help me understand. He stayed quiet. Dr. Klein did not rush him. After nearly a full minute, Tate finally spoke again. There are things about my life, he said carefully, that don't disappear just because I love someone. Of course. And some of those things, he struggled for the words, they're ugly. Dr. Klein's expression remained composed. Ugly how? Tate laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. The kind of ugly rich families hide behind charity galas and magazine covers. The therapist watched him closely now. You think if Noah knew everything, she said gently, he might see you differently. Yes, the answer came immediately. And that terrifies you. Yes. Another silence stretched between them. Dr. Klein spoke softly. Do you love Noah enough to let him know the real version of you? Tate looked genuinely unsettled by the question. I don't even know if there is a real version anymore. That's usually a sign someone has been performing for a very long time. He leaned back again, staring at the ceiling now like he suddenly felt trapped inside his own thoughts. My entire life has been managed, he admitted quietly. Every friendship, every school, every public appearance, every relationship. And Chloe. Tate closed his eyes briefly. Chloe was strategic. Strategic for whom? My family. And for you. He hesitated. At first, I convinced myself it was necessary because I had no choice if I desired to marry. Dr. Klein nodded slowly, because it made your life simpler. Because it made me look normal. The honesty in the sentence lingered heavily in the room. Tate laughed bitterly under his breath afterward, ashamed of how quickly the truth had escaped him. There it is, he muttered. Dr. Klein's voice stayed gentle. You learn to survive by becoming acceptable. Yes. And Noah. Tate swallowed hard. Noah always looked at me like he could see through all of it. The therapist remained quiet. That's what made him dangerous, Tate admitted. Not because he'd expose me, because around him I stopped knowing how to pretend correctly. Dr. Klein nodded faintly, as though something had finally clicked into place. So Noah represents emotional exposure. Yes. And Riley. Tate frowned slightly. What about Riley? What does Riley represent? Tate thought about it for a moment. Control, he answered quietly. Predictability, the kind of life people congratulate you for. But not necessarily the kind of life that feels true to Noah. That's what I think. Dr. Klein folded her hands together again. And yet, she said carefully, you're asking Noah to abandon emotional safety for authenticity while still withholding parts of yourself from him. That sentence visibly stung. Tate looked down again. That's not entirely fair, he said quietly. Why not? Because some things aren't easy to say out loud. I agree. You don't just sit somebody down and unload years of, he shook his head, damage. No, Dr. Klein agreed softly, but intimacy requires honesty eventually. Tate stayed silent. If you want Noah to choose you, she continued, then you have to give him the opportunity to choose the full truth of you, not the curated version. He looked exhausted now, emotionally cornered in a way he clearly wasn't used to. And if the truth makes him leave, he asked quietly. Dr. Klein's expression softened noticeably. Then at least he left while loving someone real. That answer hurt, she could tell it did. Tate looked away toward the rain-streaked window beside the office door. My family always said transparency is dangerous, he murmured. And what do you believe? Tate laughed faintly. I think they were probably right. Emotionally dangerous, yes, Dr. Klein said, but sometimes emotional safety built entirely on secrecy isn't safety at all, it's distance. He sat with that for a while. Then finally, you really think Noah and I are both doing the same thing? In different ways, she answered. How? Dr. Klein crossed one leg over the other thoughtfully. You believe Noah hides behind domestic normalcy because he's afraid of vulnerability. Tate nodded slightly. And I think you hide behind emotional intensity because it prevents you from having to fully slow down and be known. That made him look back at her immediately. What does that even mean? It means intense relationships can sometimes create the illusion of closeness without requiring full transparency. Tate frowned. When relationships are constantly emotionally charged, she explained gently, people focus on surviving feelings moment to moment. Desire, fear, jealousy, reconciliation, longing, it can actually distract from quieter truths. Like what? Like whom someone really is when the chaos settles. Tate stared at her silently. You know Noah emotionally, she continued softly, but does he truly know you beyond your longing for him? That question lingered painfully. Finally, Tate answered in a quieter voice than before. Probably not completely. And does Noah fully know himself? Tate shook his head slowly. No. Dr. Klein nodded once. That's the problem. The room became still again. You're both asking each other to make life-altering decisions while neither of you is being entirely honest, she said carefully, not necessarily maliciously, but incompletely. Tate rubbed tiredly at his eyes. So what we're doomed, are we a house of cards? No. Then what? Then both of you have difficult choices to make. He waited quietly. You, Dr. Klein said gently, have to decide whether your secrets keep you warmer at night than Noah does. Tate's expression faltered slightly at the wording. And Noah, she continued, has to decide whether maintaining the image of a perfect domestic life matters more to him than internal and external integrity. Tate leaned back slowly in the folded chair again, absorbing every word. You think he's lying to himself? I think both of you are trying to negotiate with truths that refuse to stay buried. He laughed weakly under his breath. That sounds dramatic. You and Noah both sound dramatic. For the first time all session, Tate smiled genuinely, briefly. Then it faded again almost immediately. What if I tell him everything, he asked quietly, and it still isn't enough? Dr. Klein's voice became very soft then. Then at least the relationship finally stood on something real. Tate looked down at his hands. You called us a house of cards earlier, he said after a moment. I did. He nodded faintly, yeah. Dr. Klein's expression remained calm but compassionate. Houses of cards can look beautiful, she said, balanced, delicate, almost magical from a distance. Tate listened quietly. But they collapse the moment honesty enters the room too quickly. That sentence settled deep into the silence between them. And if we survive it, Tate asked. Dr. Klein gave him a small, thoughtful smile. Then maybe for the first time, she said softly, you and Noah would actually be loving each other instead of loving the unfinished stories you've built around one another. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dr. Klein looked back at him one last time before walking toward the office door. Tate, she said quietly, if you are unwilling to fully show transparency and admit your secrets, flaws, fears, and the parts of yourself you're most ashamed of to Noah. She paused. Then you have no business chasing him as a partner. The sentence landed without cruelty, which somehow made it hit harder. Tate's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't argue. Dr. Klein continued, her tone calm and unwavering. You keep describing Noah as someone afraid to live honestly, but honesty is not selective. Tate stared down at his hands. You cannot ask another person to emotionally undress in front of you, she said softly, while remaining half-hidden yourself. The room felt painfully quiet. You say Noah deserves a love that's real, she continued, then give him something real to choose. Tate swallowed hard. And if the truth costs me him, he asked quietly. Dr. Klein studied him for a long moment before answering. Then the relationship was never surviving on truth to begin with. You can't lose a lie, but love built on truth is a real entity that's not worth losing without fighting for it. That answer hollowed something out in him. She could see it happen in real time. Tate leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees again, staring at the floor like he suddenly wasn't sure what parts of his life were constructed and what parts were genuine anymore. My whole life, he said faintly, people have told me some truths are too dangerous to survive. Dr. Klein nodded once, that may be true. He looked up at her then. But intimacy requires risk, she added gently. Real intimacy, not longing, not obsession, not emotional dependency, actual intimacy. Tate's expression tightened at the distinction. You and Noah, she said carefully, have spent years circling each other emotionally, pulling closer, pulling away, projecting meanings onto each other, romanticizing pain, avoiding direct truths. Her voice softened further. But eventually adulthood asks different things from people than longing does. Tate stayed silent. At some point, Dr. Klein continued, you either become honest or you become tragic. That line lingered heavily between them. Tate laughed once under his breath, but it sounded tired more than amused. You really know how to end a session. A faint smile touched her face, occupational hazard. Then her expression grew serious again. If Noah genuinely does not want to be with you, she said, then he needs to set that boundary clearly and consistently. And you need to respect it. Tate looked away again after hearing that. But if Noah does love you, she continued, then both of you owe each other something neither of you seems very practiced at yet. What's that? He asked quietly. Complete honesty. The answer sat heavily in the room. No performances, she said. No half-confessions, no emotionally loaded guessing games where each of you tries to interpret what the other really means. no using physical intimacy as a substitute for communication. Tate's expression flickered slightly at that last part. You both need to say the actual things, Dr. Klein finished, clearly, directly, even if it ruins the fantasy. Tate leaned back in the folded chair slowly, staring toward the ceiling again. And what if the fantasy is all we have left, he murmured. Dr. Klein was quiet for a moment before answering. Then you were never really together to begin with. That one hurt enough that he visibly looked away from her. The therapist walked toward the office door, one hand already resting against the handle. But before leaving, she glanced back one final time. For what it's worth, she said softly, I don't think either of you is toxic. I think you're two emotionally frightened people trying to love each other without fully knowing how. Tate looked up at her quietly. And sometimes, Dr. Klein added, people confuse being deeply affected by one another with being ready for one another. The room went still again. Then she opened the door. Good luck, Tate. And with that, she stepped into the hallway and let the door close behind her. The soft click echoed through the office. Tate sat alone in silence afterward, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor while Dr. Klein's words replayed relentlessly in his head. You either become honest or you become tragic. For the first time in a very long time, Tate wasn't thinking about how to convince Noah to stay. He was thinking about whether Noah had ever truly known him at all. Tate Blue had been in the psych ward for exactly 24 hours, 24 hours without human touch, 24 hours without the taste of another body against his. His skin felt too tight, his blood too hot, every nerve ending screaming for release. Noah wasn't coming, that much was obvious now. His elusive male partner had left him to this sterile hell of white walls and fluorescent lights. Tate paced his room like a caged animal, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. The frustration built in his gut, a pressure that demanded relief. He needed to fuck something, needed to bury himself in warmth and feel that sweet friction that would quiet the roar in his head. Tate noticed a hot girl during the evening medication round. Mandy, the name suited her, sweet, bright, entirely out of place in this dreary institution. She was maybe 24 with short blonde hair that fell in soft waves around her face. Her uniform hugged her curves in all the right places, the white fabric stretching across her chest as she moved. She had a smile that could disarm anyone, but Tate wasn't interested in her personality. He watched her, studied her routines, the way she checked the supply closet at 8:15 p.m., the way she lingered in the hallway when the night shift took over. Security always dropped to a skeleton crew after 8. By 8 p.m., the ward had settled into its evening quiet. The other patients were in their rooms. The guards had retreated to their stations, bored and complacent. Tate waited, his body coiled with anticipation, his cock already half-hard at the thought of what he was about to do. Mandy emerged from the supply closet, her arms full of fresh linens. She was alone, perfect. Tate moved fast, his hand clamping over her mouth before she could scream. Her body slammed against the wall with a dull thud, the linens scattering across the floor. She struggled, her eyes wide with shock, but Tate was stronger. He pressed his body against hers, pinning her in place, his breath hot against her ear. Don't make a sound, he whispered, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not going to hurt you, I just need you. She giggled. Tate has sex with Mandy. A voice shattered the moment. What the fuck is going on here? Tate's eyes snapped open. A guard stood at the end of the hallway, his face twisted with shock and fury. Radio static crackled from his belt as he reached for his weapon. Warden's going to hear about this, the guard snarled, shoving Tate forward. You're fucking done, mate. Tate didn't resist. His body was still humming with the aftershocks of pleasure, his muscles loose and satisfied. He'd gotten what he needed. The consequences didn't matter. They threw him into the warden's office, the door slamming shut behind him with a heavy, final click. Tate spent the entire next day confined to his room beneath 24-hour observation. The psych ward suddenly felt much smaller when every movement was watched. A security guard remained stationed outside his door nearly the entire morning, occasionally glancing through the narrow observation window like Tate was something unpredictable that might snap without warning. Even the nurses who brought his meals acted differently around him now, shorter eye contact, clipped voices, careful distance. Word had spread fast. The warden had been furious the night before. Not loud and furious. Worse, exhausted furious. The kind reserved for someone who had spent too many years dealing with unstable wealthy patients who believed consequences bent around them. You think this is a hotel? The man snapped across his desk while Tate sat silently opposite him under fluorescent office lights. You think I enjoy dealing with this after 8 o'clock at night? Tate hadn't answered. The warden rubbed both hands across his face before continuing. You're under psychiatric evaluation, not on vacation. It wasn't one-sided, Tate muttered quietly. That doesn't matter, the man's voice hardened instantly. She was staff, you were a patient, there are rules for a reason. Tate looked away after that. The warden leaned back heavily in his chair. Do you understand how much liability this creates for the facility? She's going to lose her job. Mandy already did. That sentence had landed harder than Tate expected. For the first time all night, genuine guilt crossed his face. The warden noticed immediately. You should feel responsible, he said bluntly, because you are partially responsible. Tate's jaw tightened. I didn't force her into anything. I didn't say you did. The older man sighed tiredly. But part of becoming an adult, he continued, is recognizing when your charisma becomes destructive. That line had stayed with Tate long after the meeting ended. By morning, he had lost television privileges, dessert privileges, and recreational access for the remainder of the week. The punishments themselves felt childish to him. What bothered him more was Mandy. Fired. Gone because she blurred boundaries with him. Tate spent most of the following day lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling while Dr. Klein's words replayed relentlessly in his head beside the warden's. You use intensity to avoid honesty. Your charisma becomes destructive. By 3 o'clock the next afternoon, a nurse escorted him back toward Dr. Klein's office. Tate expected disappointment, judgment, maybe irritation. Instead, when he entered the office, Dr. Klein simply looked up from her paper tablet with the same calm expression she always wore. No anger. No shock. No visible opinion at all. Which somehow unsettled him more. Sit down, Tate. He lowered himself into the folded chair across from her desk. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Dr. Klein finished writing something on the tablet before finally setting it aside. How are you feeling today? She asked calmly. Tate gave a dry laugh, like I'm in middle school detention. That bad? They took my dessert privileges. I didn't eat pudding today, Tate scowled. Dr. Klein smiled and asked, when you're out and about, what's your favorite dessert? Tate grinned, usually something sweet, blonde, and impossible to resist. Dr. Klein raised an eyebrow. I meant an actual dessert, something you can eat. Tate laughed and winked. Fine, a big slice of chocolate cake. Dr. Klein shook her head amused. Much better. Tate leaned back in his chair, still smiling. You asked, I never promised I'd give you a normal answer. To his surprise, one corner of Dr. Klein's mouth twitched slightly, a devastating loss. Tate rubbed tiredly at his face. You're not going to lecture me. I imagine the warden already handled that. He did. And did it help? Tate thought about it honestly, a little. Dr. Klein nodded once. Good. Silence settled briefly between them again. Finally, Tate sighed heavily. You think I'm a predator now? No, Dr. Klein answered immediately. The speed of the answer caught him off guard. I think, she continued carefully, you're someone who seeks emotional regulation through intensity, attention, validation, and physical connection. That sounds like therapist language for disaster. It can become disastrous if left unexamined. Tate leaned back in the folded chair. Mandy wasn't innocent. I know. She wanted the attention too. I know that as well. Tate frowned slightly. Then why do I still feel like the villain? Dr. Klein folded her hands together calmly. Because deep down, she said softly, I think you understand that you weren't actually looking for Mandy. That made him go quiet immediately. You were looking for escape, she continued. From guilt, from confinement, from Noah, from yourself. Tate stared at the floor. The timing matters, Dr. Klein added gently. Yesterday's conversation forced you into emotional vulnerability. Hours later, you pursued distraction through seduction and impulsivity. Tate let out a faint exhale through his nose. When you say it like that, I sound insane. You sound emotionally overwhelmed. That's a nicer word. It's also a more accurate one. Tate sat silently for a moment before finally speaking again. I didn't mean for her to get fired. I believe you. But I still did it anyway. Yes. That simple acknowledgement hurt more than defensiveness would have. Dr. Klein studied him carefully. Do you know what strikes me most about this situation? What? You still keep framing intimacy as something that happens to you emotionally instead of something you consciously participate in. Tate frowned. What does that mean? You describe attraction like gravity, she explained. Like once tension exists, events become inevitable. Tate looked away because part of him knew she was right. But adulthood, Dr. Klein continued, requires recognizing the moment where desire stops being passive and becomes a choice. Tate rubbed at the back of his neck tiredly. You make everything sound clinical. That's because emotions become dangerous when people romanticize their lack of control. That line sat heavily between them. Finally, Tate muttered quietly, I think I just wanted to feel wanted by somebody. Dr. Klein's expression softened noticeably at that. That, she said gently, sounds much more honest. The room grew quiet again. She looked at me like I wasn't broken, Tate admitted after a while. And Noah? Tate laughed weakly. Noah looks at me like he sees exactly how broken I am. Which is harder? Tate thought about it carefully. Noah. Why? Because if Noah leaves, Tate said quietly, he leaves knowing the real version of me. Dr. Klein nodded slowly, and Mandy. She only saw pieces. Safe pieces. Tate gave a faint, bitter smile, manageable pieces. The therapist leaned back slightly in her chair. Tate, do you know why emotionally unavailable people sometimes appear intensely passionate? He frowned slightly. Why? Because controlled doses of vulnerability can feel intoxicating without requiring true exposure. That sentence visibly unsettled him. You really think I'm emotionally unavailable? I think you desperately want intimacy, she corrected gently, but wanting intimacy and tolerating intimacy are different skills. Tate stared at her silently. You crave being understood, she continued. But the moment someone gets too close to your shame, your fear, your history, you redirect into seduction, intensity, conflict, or emotional chaos. He looked down again after that because he couldn't entirely deny it. Mandy represented temporary relief, Dr. Klein said softly. No expectations, no complicated emotional history, no childhood wounds, no possibility of true rejection. Tate laughed quietly under his breath, until security walked in. Yes, Dr. Klein replied dryly, reality tends to interrupt coping mechanisms eventually. Despite himself, Tate smiled faintly. It disappeared quickly, though. You know, Dr. Klein said carefully, for someone who fears abandonment so deeply, you unconsciously create situations that guarantee distance afterward. That observation hit him harder than the others. What's that supposed to mean? You sabotage the connection the moment it risks becoming emotionally real. Tate looked frustrated now, so now I'm sabotaging people subconsciously. Not maliciously, she said calmly, protectively. He leaned back again, exhausted. That sounds exhausting. It is. The room quieted once more. Then Dr. Klein spoke very gently. I don't think what happened with Mandy was really about sex. Tate looked at her carefully. I think it was about loneliness. That answer stripped away most of his defensiveness immediately. Because underneath all the manipulation, impulsivity, and emotional confusion, he knew she was right. Dr. Klein studied Tate quietly for a moment after his last comment about loneliness. Then unexpectedly, she smiled faintly and picked her pen back up. I think I know why you were drawn to Mandy. Tate leaned back in the folded chair with a tired expression. Because I'm emotionally self-destructive. That too, but therapy can help you learn to choose genuine expressions of healthy behavior instead of self-destructive, unhealthy patterns, Dr. Klein said dryly. A reluctant smirk crossed his face. But I think there's another reason. Her pen moved slowly across the paper tablet as she spoke. You have a very specific type, Tate. He raised an eyebrow immediately. Oh God. You gravitate toward people who remind you of Noah. That's not true. Dr. Klein glanced up calmly. Mandy was small, blonde, soft-featured, emotionally receptive, sexually responsive, slightly emotionally avoidant. Tate groaned quietly. You make me sound psychologically embarrassing. You are psychologically embarrassing, but it's sweet and sentimental, she replied without missing a beat. Despite himself, he laughed under his breath. You chose Mandy because she subconsciously resembled familiarity, Dr. Klein continued. Not necessarily Noah himself, but emotionally adjacent to the kind of person you're drawn toward. She had short hair, Tate tried weakly. Dr. Klein gave him a look. That is your defense. Tate rubbed his face with both hands. I was lonely. I know. I hadn't slept with anyone in like a day and a half. Dr. Klein blinked once slowly, a true humanitarian crisis. I'm serious, Tate protested. I'm a young guy, I have desires. You also have hands. Tate stared at her for a second before laughing despite himself. Jesus Christ. I'm a psychiatrist, Tate, not a nun. That's becoming alarmingly clear. Dr. Klein's mouth twitched faintly again before she returned to writing something in her tablet. It's not the same, Tate muttered after a moment. No, she agreed calmly, it usually isn't. Silence settled briefly between them again. Then Dr. Klein tapped the edge of the tablet lightly with her pen. If you manage to behave for the next 29 hours, I may be able to convince the warden to restore some of your privileges on your last day here. Tate narrowed his eyes suspiciously. You're bribing me with television. I'm incentivizing emotional regulation. That sounds less fun. It usually is. Tate leaned farther back in the folded chair, studying her with open curiosity now. You know, he said casually, most therapists would probably act way more uncomfortable around me after the Mandy thing. Dr. Klein shrugged slightly. I don't shock easily. I used to work at the state prison where most of the guys hadn't seen a woman in 10 years. Imagine the stories they tell about their hands. Tate grimaced clearly. And frankly, she added, your behavior was less interesting to me than the motivation behind it. That's the most therapist sentence I've ever heard. She ignored that. You seek attachment impulsively whenever you feel emotionally abandoned. Tate sighed dramatically. There she is. The behavior itself isn't unique, Dr. Klein continued calmly. What's interesting is how quickly you confuse being desired with being emotionally safe. That made him quieter. You think people wanting you proves something, she said gently, but it doesn't necessarily mean they know you. Tate stared toward the ceiling. Noah knows me. Does he? The question came softly but directly enough to make him look back at her immediately. He knows more than anybody else. That wasn't my question. Tate frowned slightly. Dr. Klein rested the pen against the tablet. You've spent several sessions describing Noah as emotionally guarded, but every time we approach your own deeper fears, you redirect into humor, seduction, or sarcasm. I'm literally sitting in a psych ward talking about my feelings voluntarily. And somehow still managing to avoid certain truths. Tate looked away again after that. Dr. Klein softened her tone slightly. Tate, emotionally expressive people are not always emotionally transparent people. That sounds fake deep. It sounds accurate. He gave a faint smile despite himself. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Tate tilted his head slightly. So, what exactly are you writing in that thing all session? My notes. Am I winning? No, there's no winning or failing in therapy. Devastating. Dr. Klein shook her head faintly, though amusement briefly crossed her face again. You know, Tate said thoughtfully, you're way more normal than I expected a psychiatrist to be. What were you expecting? A woman with giant glasses who asks me how my dreams symbolize my mother. I saved that for session 5. Tate laughed outright at that one. The laughter faded after a few seconds, though, replaced by quieter curiosity. So are you actually married? He asked. I am. How long? 4 years to a nice lady. Tate blinked slightly. Wow. Dr. Klein nodded once. We were married in Canada before I moved to LA. Tate studied her for a moment. You seem happy about it. I am. That answer came with immediate certainty, Tate noticed. What's that like? He asked before he could stop himself. Dr. Klein tilted her head slightly. Being married. Being sure. That question lingered in the room differently than the others had. Dr. Klein leaned back thoughtfully. It's quieter than people expect. Quiet sounds boring. Only to people accustomed to emotional chaos. Tate sighed dramatically. There she is again. You walked into that one. He smiled faintly. Then after a brief pause. I've been trying to convince Noah to marry me for weeks now. Dr. Klein watched him carefully now. And how does Noah respond? Tate rolled his eyes. Apparently, he's decided he wants to become Mr. Riley Shore III. He made an exaggerated fake gagging sound afterward. Dr. Klein gave him a long look over the top of her tablet. You do realize dismissiveness is usually a defense mechanism. I'm aware of what defense mechanisms are. I practically collect them. That may be the most self-aware thing you've said today. Tate leaned his head back against the wall behind the folded chair. I just don't get it. What? How somebody can love one person for years and then suddenly decide safety matters more. Dr. Klein considered that carefully. I don't think people choose safety instead of love, she said softly. I think they choose the version of love they believe they can survive or the type of affection they believe they deserve. That answer quieted him almost immediately. He really loved me, Tate said after a while, sounding less defensive now and more uncertain, like genuinely. I believe you. And I loved him. I believe that too. Tate stared down at his hands. Then why does it feel like I'm losing to somebody who's less in love with him than I am? Dr. Klein's expression softened slightly. Because, she said gently, love alone is not always what determines who feels safest to build a future with. Tate didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long enough that the faint ticking of the wall clock became noticeable. Finally he muttered quietly, that's depressing. Sometimes adulthood is depressing. That's a terrible slogan. Dr. Klein smiled faintly again and closed the tablet. Once their session ended, Dr. Klein set her pen down carefully on the table beside the paper tablet and stood from her chair. Tate remained slouched in the folded chair across from her, watching her with lazy curiosity. Yes, Dr. Klein? He asked, his voice carrying that familiar mischievous edge she had already learned usually meant trouble was coming. Dr. Klein shook her head faintly. Tate, she said dryly, you flirt like it's a reflex. It basically is. I noticed. He smirked slightly at that. For a moment, she simply studied him with mild amusement before speaking again. There's somewhere in the ward I'd like to show you, she said, if you have a moment. Tate immediately narrowed his eyes suspiciously. That sounds ominous. It isn't. Are you finally going to seduce me and destroy my innocence? Dr. Klein looked at him over the rim of her glasses with open disbelief. Tate, her voice turned unmistakably maternal, be serious for at least 6 consecutive seconds. I'm trying. No, you aren't. A reluctant laugh escaped him. Dr. Klein moved toward the office door. Come on. Tate stood slowly from the folded chair and followed her out into the hallway, hands shoved into the pockets of his gray facility sweatpants. Several nurses glanced toward them as they passed, though nobody stopped them. Where are we going? He asked. You'll see. That's not reassuring in a psychiatric institution. You watch too many movies. I had television privileges once. Dr. Klein sighed quietly. You are never letting the dessert thing go, are you? They took my pudding from me, Dr. Klein. Tate did a mock voice of a crazy person. Healing takes time. She shook her head again, though Tate caught the faint smile she was trying not to show. They walked farther down the quieter wing of the facility, away from the common rooms and patient bedrooms. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while the smell of disinfectant lingered faintly in the air. You know, Tate said casually as they walked, you're way calmer around me than most people. Dr. Klein glanced sideways at him. Should I be less calm? Probably. Why? Because I'm apparently manipulative and emotionally destructive. That doesn't mean you're dangerous. Tate looked at her carefully after that. You really don't think I'm dangerous? Dr. Klein slowed slightly before answering. I think, she said carefully, that you're someone who confuses emotional urgency with emotional truth. That sounds bad. It can be. They turned another corner. But I also think you're much more self-aware than you pretend to be. Tate gave a faint, skeptical laugh. That feels like a backhanded compliment. It's a psychiatrist's compliment. Terrifying species. You keep returning voluntarily. Yeah, well, Tate muttered, Stockholm Syndrome. That earned him another small smile. Eventually, Dr. Klein stopped in front of a locked door near the end of the hallway. She entered a code into the keypad beside it before pushing the door open. Tate blinked in surprise when sunlight immediately hit his face. It led to a room where there was a queen-size bed and a chair. Tate didn't understand what was happening.